Hello Christchurch, and welcome to the very first of our deeper videos. And it's good to have Rob with us.
Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you're watching this.
Whatever time of day it is. Yeah.
Or if you're in Australia, it makes no difference.
No. We don't even know what day people will be watching this. That's the incredible thing about this. Not even what year. So this is the first in our deeper series. So what we're doing with this is we are looking at the sermon and the passage from the Sunday before and just going a little bit deeper. And we're actually going to go deeper, wider and further. So deeper into the passage, wider in terms of thinking about how we apply the passage, because that's really important, isn't it? And then further in that we'll just give you a couple of questions to think about, either on your own or in your missional communities. So let's crack on with this. You ready, Rob?
I'm ready.
Great. So why don't you kick off? Because obviously I preached on half of this passage anyway on Sunday morning. What kind of struck you in this passage? What came out for you?
Well, I love Nehemiah. Nehemiah was a passionate man, and anybody knows me knows that I like passionate men. That sounds wrong, doesn't it?
That's wrong. But we're not editing it out.
What jumps out at me really was verses 11 and 12 really jumped out at me. You know, you talked on Sunday a lot about opposition, and what jumped out at me when verses 11 and 12 was there was opposition from the outside. It says our enemies said, before they know it or see us, so we all accept that, we're going to have opposition from the outside. But verse 12 says, then the Jews who lived near them came and told them 10 times over, wherever you turn, they will attack us. And it jumped out at me that, there was Nehemiah and his band of merry men and women, these Jews committed to his vision. But yet there was other Jews living around the area who were utterly not committed.
Yeah.
And who were just trying to demoralize them. Maybe they felt embarrassed. Maybe we don't know exactly what the motivation was, but they were trying to utterly demoralize them.
Yeah. And it's interesting is that Nehemiah writes, they came at us 10 times with this.
Yeah. On and on they went.
On and on, yeah. And sometimes that's what opposition's like, isn't it? It's a little thing sometimes, but it niggles away at us and keeps on and on and on and on until we get deflated, demoralized, or even worse, give in. It's that ongoing thing sometimes. It's not necessarily the big threats of violence. It's the little niggle that just keeps going and going and going that can be just as hard to cope with.
And then you take your eyes off the prize.
Yeah.
They actually couldn't see what they were achieving. The glass half full and the glass half empty. The walls were half full.
yeah, exactly. And it's interesting, isn't it? For us as Christians, as we think about some of the things that we want to do for Jesus, and we always wonder about whether Satan's going to oppose us, whether it's going to be non-Christians. It is just as likely to be Christians who just niggle away at us. In the way that it's Jews here who are saying to Nehemiah and the rest of the people of Jerusalem, this is what they're all saying. It's all terrible. We're never going to do this. We're doomed. We're all going to die. And for anything that we want to achieve, and as we talk about what we're trying to do in Southport, it might be Christians who want to discourage or demoralize us.
I don't think we have to worry about judging these Christians. They're on their own track. They've got their own life to live, and they'll come before God and have to stand before Him. What we have to do is not get diverted by it or put off by it. We don't have to listen. Our enemies say this. Who cares what our enemies say? What is God saying? That's the biggie, isn't it? What is God saying? Let's follow what God's saying, not what the enemy's saying.
Exactly. Yeah. And I kind of love how Nehemiah responds to this. I mean, we talked about the response on Sunday as being, he prayed, he remembered, and persevered. But to go deeper with how he responds, he gets them to do two things, doesn't he? He gets them to both pray and to work.
Yeah.
It's both and. Trust God, but also work flipping hard. You've got to keep going. It's both of those things together. And we sometimes forget, don't we, that building anything in the kingdom of God sometimes requires really hard work. It takes graft.
And there was different people with different gifts.
Yeah.
Not everybody did everything. People specialized. Some people that we all hate were multi-talented and could do lots of stuff. But they all had their part to play. The wall was built because they all played their part.
Yeah.
But I like what Nehemiah says when he chooses how to describe God. We could describe God in 150 different ways, and he goes for great and awesome. Was obviously what was needed for these people. We are serving a great and awesome God.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that word. I'm sure it's a trendy word to use just now.
Awesome. I think it used to be trendy. I'm not so sure now. But even that word remember, the Hebrew has a connotation of remembering something that has already happened. That's what remembering is, but remembering specifically past acts. And of course, the Jewish people had a whole history of things that God had done where he had conquered their enemies.
Yeah.
And Nehemiah is calling them back to that. Remember what God has done in the past. We may have been in exile now, but that's because of our own sinfulness and selfishness and stupidity. But remember also that God has delivered us in the past.
I also got the impression that part of that remembering, it was an act of worship.
Yeah.
It wasn't just an intellectual process of, I remember when God parted the waves. It was feeding into this awesomeness. The God that we worship is this awesome God. Remember his awesome and greatness. That mighty God.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool.
It is. And I love that idea of worship and remembering going together, because that's what worship should help us remember who God is and what he's done, and remember his character, and all those kind of things. Worship should help us remember. I like that.
Yeah.
And so he then says, because of that, don't be afraid of them. You don't have to be afraid. And one of the things that we often find with Christians, especially when there's something big to do, is that fear grips them. It's like they want to go through every what if. Well, what if this happens, and what if that happens, and how do we cope with this? And it's almost as if fear paralyzes people.
Yeah.
And so Nehemiah, who is an incredible leader here, he calls them to not be afraid, to not allow the circumstances to dictate what happened, how they behave, dictate their actions.
Yeah.
He gives them a choice, really.
I thought it was quite. I think it's interesting trying to work out what kind of character was Nehemiah. How did he put things over? We can only guess how he put things over, like we do with all Bible characters. But I think Nehemiah was a pretty black and white kind of guy.
Yeah.
He called a spade and a spear a spear.
Yeah.
And in verse kind of 16, he kind of just says, suck it up. We're going to have opposition. It's going to take longer because we're going to have opposition. And you can imagine people complaining, we can't get this wall built. We've got to spend half the time guarding it. It's not fair. What's God doing? Nehemiah just isn't interested in that kind of wallowing. We are going to have opposition. Anything worthwhile is going to come at a price.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And and they do pay a price, don't they? Not just in terms of the opposition, but just in terms of the hard work they have to put in.
Yeah.
So in the last couple of verses, last 3 verses, it talks about how from the first light of dawn till the stars come out. What a poetic way of putting that.
Yeah.
They worked all day. And normally within that culture, there'd have been an afternoon rest, a siesta type of thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem that they did that.
No.
So that they were prepared to sacrifice, to put in the hard work in order to see the vision fulfilled.
The result. Verse 17, which is comical, but it's also gobsmacking, says, those who are carrying the materials. So if you're carrying the bricks to rebuild the wall, you've got to carry it in one hand, because your other hand, you've got to carry a spear.
Yeah.
That's hard work.
That is.
That is hard work.
Yeah. It's also very clever what Nehemiah does here, because so those who are carrying stuff as a spirit, a weapon in one hand, and they carry stuff with the other. Those who were laying the bricks, they had their swords at their side, and because they needed two hands to be able to lay the bricks and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So you can see what's going on there. They are being as prepared as possible.
Yeah.
For enemy attack.
It's the full armor of God, isn't it? I suppose applying it, it's the full armor of God. Don't be naive to the fiery darts of the enemy. How he's going to try and get at us. Exactly.
And I think, one of the things that this speaks to me about, unsurprisingly, is prayer. When we think about how we fight in the spiritual battle, prayer is a major part of that. And here, there were some who were doing the work and some who were watching and ready to fight. And that's just like church, really, isn't it? That sometimes there are people who are getting stuck in and getting their hands dirty, and there are others who are praying for that work.
Yeah.
That's kind of the whole kind of body of Christ image. And sometimes it's reversed. It's those who have been working sometimes go through a season where they should be praying for what's going on, what the others are then doing. But sometimes, a bit like like these people, we have to both work and pray. We have to be in a sense of urgency that comes in those last few verses. They're determined to get this job done quickly.
Yeah.
So
I think sometimes, so with prayer. I've read a brilliant book by Paul Yonggi Cho, Prayer Key to Revival. It's 25 years old now.
Yeah,
but he talks about the spiritual battles in the heavenly realms. And he talks about how long he spends in prayer in Europe compared to South Korea. Because we're such a satanic part of the world, he has to spend a lot longer in prayer, clearing the communication between him and God. And that's reality. We know about Daniel having the angel preventing coming because of a spiritual battle. And I just don't think we can be naive that there is a spiritual battle, and prayer is a key component in us achieving our vision, because it can clear the airwaves of simplicity.
Yeah. In fact, Nehemiah would probably say it's both prayer and work. I think if anyone said to him, I'll just be at the back praying, he'd be like, no, go and grab a brick. You got to pray and work.
You can pray while you lay. Yeah.
Exactly. It's the praying without ceasing, as Paul said. You have to be doing the work and also praying. It's not just one or the other. It's we sometimes get caught up in that. Some people don't like to get their hands dirty, and you need people who are intercessors.
Yes.
But sometimes we all need to, in times of urgency, we all need to be carrying bricks and carrying our weapons. We need to be doing both. Before we finish just looking into the passage, is there anything else that you want to pick up on?
I just think verse 14, remember what we're fighting for.
Yeah.
He reminds them, you're fighting for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, your homes. And I think for us at Christ Church, and for each individual Christian, but us as a body, as a community, we need to know what our vision is. Remember what we're trying to achieve. And I think, as me individually, myself and Simon often laugh about this. Can I quote the 6 different, but the 5 key parts of the vision? Have I eaten it, to use Peterson's words? Is it part of me? Do I know why I'm doing this? If you don't know why you're doing it, it's a lot easier to get despondent.
Yeah.
Why am I putting this brick on this brick? What's this wall all about?
Exactly. And that's a nice segue into our next section, where we were going to think a little bit about what's the application out of this passage, and let's think through that. So, Rob, what kind of things do you want to draw out of that you want to apply to your life, and you think others should apply to their lives too? What are the key points?
For me, a really good thing for me, I'm trying to find the actual verse, that is we're in this together. This is a community. We've got our individual roles, be you carrying bricks, laying them, whatever. But this is as a community, and it says somewhere that come on, you find it quicker than me. When the battle comes, we'll sound the trumpet, and you come.
Yes.
You come.
Yeah. Verse 20.
Verse 20, is it?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, join us there. This is a collective fight. And if one's struggling, we're all struggling. We join us there. It's a community. We're trying to achieve something, together.
Exactly.
It's a little bit wet, but it's not wet. I think it's vitally important to understand that.
It is. And, again, that goes back to Ephesians 6 and the armour of God, and how Roman soldiers would set themselves up, as both a defensive and attacking unit. They were together.
Yeah.
Like one of my favourite films is Gladiator, where you see some of that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely. Unity is important. And it's not just unity, it's being prepared to fight for one another.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's vital, isn't it? I think one of the things that struck me as an application is that Nehemiah gives the people of Jerusalem a choice. He says, basically, you can be paralyzed by fear at the threats coming our way, or you can be galvanized by the vision and go for the vision.
Yeah.
And you've got a choice. And I think whenever we face opposition, we sometimes feel like we haven't got any choice in this. We just got to give up or get deflated. But we always have choice.
Yeah.
And, it's about making sure that we make the right choices and we keep going after what God has called us to do, and not give up. Not just see opposition as a sign for us to pack it all in.
Yeah. Yeah. Push.
Keep pushing. Yeah.
Keep pushing. Yeah. Pray until something happens.
Keep praying. I think one of the other things is, we were talking about this before about, Nehemiah's leadership. And, not everyone sees themselves as a leader. But here, Nehemiah inspires those around him to go after the vision and to go after what God wants. And we might not be leaders, but we can all inspire others just by speaking positively, by pointing people to what God has called us to do, by getting our hands dirty, by just being involved. We can be an inspiration to others to encourage them in the rebuilding of whatever it is we need to rebuild. And I think
Nehemiah inspired many other, for want of a better expression, many leaders, because he set them up round the wall in their families, in their groups, to defend an area, and they had people responsible for all these different parts of the build under his guidance. But he inspired people to step up. I think we, as a church, we need to look at doing that. Leadership can take many different forms, and each person has their own responsibility to go in the world and preach the gospel and make disciples. It's not just for the vicars, is it?
No. And at some point, we've all got to pick up a brick.
Yes.
And get, just do something.
And make that decision, where we're going to put it.
Exactly. I think one of the other things that just struck me is we see it in this chapter, and we also saw it in chapter 2. Nehemiah never makes a hasty decision. No. So in chapter 2, we saw how he on his own went around the walls to see the state of the walls before he called others to follow the vision. And then here in verse 14, he says, after I looked things over, I stood up and said to them all, don't be afraid. Yeah. And I think that's something that we as Christians need to just hold on to. We're talking at the moment, aren't we, about rebuilding both church and Southport, and people will get really keen to get involved in action, which is absolutely great. But at some point, we've just got to look over at what's going on and make sure we're doing the right thing at the right time. Because what we don't want to do is waste our time and energy on things that God hasn't called us to do. I think there's something there for us around just, always just being aware of knowing what the facts are.
I think it's interesting knowing what the facts are. I always say to Bethany, when Bethany quotes me somebody, I say, where's he from? Who's he represent? Who's financing him? What's his agenda? Because you can say, but this person says this, so therefore it must be correct. And that's that. When I do my looking at that's Sanballat. Sanballat came from Samaria, and Samaria was going to be really affected if Jerusalem regained prominence. Samaria was the main city, so he had a massive personal interest on destroying this enterprise.
True.
And we can't ignore that. You have to think, who's opposing us? Why are they opposing us? Don't just take it what they say as gospel. But it very often won't be.
That's
and
right.
that comes from Christians as well, unfortunately.
Exactly. We need to look at the issue behind the issue sometimes and fully understand what's going on.
Yeah.
And I loved your point about, fighting for your sons and daughters and your wives. And I think, one of the application points for me is I looked at that, is that, when we're talking about rebuilding Southport, creating a better future for Southport, what we're talking about is creating a better future for our families.
Yeah.
Because most of us will have families here in some way, whether it's, younger kids or parents or whatever. We're not just looking at this as a nice idea or just to make a better place to live in for us. We are doing this for our families and for the kids who follow us, their kids. It's about building for them. And in that sense, it's personal. It's not abstract for us. It is deeply personal. When we're talking about rebuilding Southport, it is personal for us, and we need to see it that way.
I would love it. I look at Bill Johnston's church in Redding, California, and the amount of money that they pour into that town because the town knows that church loves that town. Yeah. I know our strapline is Christchurch at the heart of Southport with a heart for Southport, but right now, I'm not convinced how many people in Southport outside our church would know or think that we have a heart for Southport. It'd be wonderful to see that part of the vision become a reality, not in our lives, but in the lives of those who don't come to our church, that we're known for that.
Exactly. That'd be wonderful, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So let's just start to wind this up. We're just going to give you a couple of questions to think about. So one of my questions is this: where is fear either demoralizing or paralyzing you? Because that was the thing that gripped the people in Jerusalem. And what have you learned out of this that would help you move into action? I think that would be one question I'd want to ask people. You got one, Rob?
Question for me? Yeah, a question for me is, Nehemiah was a man of vision, and we're a church that has a vision. Which part of our vision are you currently trying to achieve?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Have you just thought of that one? That's a great
it's come to me over the past half hour.
Just off the top of your head, it's brilliant. That's a great question. I suppose, and I think, one of the questions I would want to pick up on is, how are you praying and fighting for Southport? That whole idea of if carrying a weapon for them is for us a bit like prayer, how are you contending for Southport in prayer? What do you need to do to develop that a little bit further? Are the people that you can pray with for that, either as a missional community or friends within church, or perhaps even other churches? Have you got another one, Rob?
Yeah, it's slightly linked to that. It comes from out of verse 20. If you've got an issue, if you need help, who do you call on? We're a family. Have you got somebody that you can just pick up that phone to, or in your group? How can you work out? What do you do when you've got an issue? That, who do you call on to fight with you?
Yeah.
Because we all need a buddy, a support network, an accountability partner, prayer trip, whatever you want to call it. And I think we can easily not have that. We can just turn it along and not get that put in place.
I think that idea can develop into, if you've got people who you're gathering around you in some sense, how are you going to develop that into not just support and prayer, but also action? Okay, we're going to bring that to an end. Thank you, Rob, for joining me on this. I hope you've enjoyed the first edition of Deeper. If you've got ideas on how we can improve it, we're always open to those ideas, so just let me know. And we'll provide another one of these next week based on Nehemiah chapter 5. So thank you, and we'll see you again soon.
Goodbye.